Fáilte ró goléir chuig an ollscoil an tróna seo don ócéid tábhacht agus speisialta our seminar blin tool Ken Saro-Wiwa. You're all very welcome to our annual Ken Saro-Wiwa Seminar to the University this afternoon. This date marks the 24th anniversary of the execution of the Ogoni 9. 8 years ago on this date, Sister Magella donated the death row letters and poems she received from Saro-Wiwa to Maynooth University. In the blog post that Sister Magella wrote for the Library Special Collections and Archives blog, which was posted this week, she captures the subsequent level of activity around the archive. The title of this post, The Box in the Wardrobe, refers to the box containing the archive, which she kept in her wardrobe for more than 16 years. And I just want to read you a short extract on what Magella had to say about her concept of archives. This is 2019, and we are still finding not just papers, but inspiration in what was the box in the wardrobe. My vision had been somewhat different. The archives would be in a hidden room, very quiet, dark mahogany, and only one or two people about. It was about to be the final resting place for Ogoni matters in Ireland, to which the lone researcher with the plastic gloves might be admitted through gates and observed from cameras. Much in the sense of a vault, a gravestone, where every year I might visit to reflect on an extraordinary, painful reality that had been part of my justice ministry. Visiting the library on a lovely summer morning, I found myself greeting a bunch of lively children from a neighbouring town whose mothers, mostly of Nigerian background, had decided that a worthwhile holiday activity would be to visit the university library to see the archive. I found the children spread out comfortably on beanbags, listening to the Ogoni story from the archives suitably adapted to their age. This is where I encountered the activation of an archive. If the full post is available on the blog. Over the past few weeks, our archivists have indeed been very active and have prepared an exhibition of material from the archive, which I hope you'll take the opportunity to visit in the library foyer. This year, for the first time, we have material also from Troca as part of this exhibition, something which we welcome very, very much, and we're very pleased to have representatives of Troca with us here today. They are very much part of the Ogoni story. Troca provided funding and other resources for the relief effort after Ogoni villages were destroyed, and were very active in the campaign, sadly unsuccessful to save the lives of the Ogoni 9. The library is indebted to Troca for helping to fund the publication of Silence Will Be Treason, which has now gone into a second edition and is also freely available as an ebook, part of the library's commitment to open access. And I was just saying to some people, yesterday I was speaking at an event in London about open access, and it was very much a kind of clash of titans between the European library sector, which spends about $1 billion a year on resources, and the publishing industry, which makes about 20 billion a year from libraries, and we were fighting it out. And I was tweeting earlier about doing this event, and I said, you know, what a contrast it is. But in many ways, one of the key threads is that actually not only is the book available open access, but so is the archive and the DRI. And I do think it's important that libraries kind of walk the walk as well as talk the talk in this regard. So I was pleased to be able to point that out. The first international exhibition of material from the collection opened at the Quinnipiac University in Connecticut in 2016. A Ken Saro-Wiwa travelling exhibition in Irish Public Libraries commenced in January of this year in Kildare, and you're going to hear more about these outreach activities today. Work with an American filmmaker, and this is very exciting, which hopes to make a film on the Saro-Wiwa story, continues. It's not very often in my life I can tell you I get an email that talks about Netflix and studios and so on. and they're not that interested in me yet, but they certainly are just interested in Ken Saro-Wiwa. And it's really, really hard to get that. As of course, it's all down to Helen's wonderful work. And of course, it's important to point out that any revenues from this initiative and indeed other initiatives like the book are used towards the Ken Saro-Wiwa bursary, which the library has organised. All this outdoor activity is a far cry from Sister Magella's thoughts of a dark and silent hidden room as a resting place for the box in the wardrobe. Before I finish, I just want to say a word of thanks and praise to Helen, because Helen wrote most of these notes for me, which is why I'm reading them out, because I was away over the last couple of days, and she always leaves herself out. And that would be a terrible injustice not to acknowledge her wonderful role and work in those years in between in driving it. I just said to someone else earlier, we have many, many collections in the university, but what this is a real tribute to is where someone has a real drive and passion for a collection, the amazing things that are possible. So now I'm going to hand back to Helen, who's going to chair the seminar. Glimi Rakov.
Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who in fact is Samuel Odogbo, a priest from Nigeria, and he's a PhD candidate in the sociology department here in Maynooth University. And he has a keen interest in development studies, and his PhD is entitled Youth Activism, Participatory Action Research in the Niger Delta, focus on the Ogoni. And in fact, Samuel isn't very long back from doing research in Nigeria. So Samuel's going to talk to us today and give us an update. Thanks, Samuel.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming, and thanks to Helen, thanks to Sister Magella, who has given us this legacy. I want to talk about Ogoni. My PhD research is actually, as Sister Helen said, on the Ogonis. I am looking specifically at non-violent youth mobilization on one hand, and then I am also looking at development. So I'm examining socio-economic and political inequalities amongst the Ogoni people. What I'm going to talk about is just one small aspect of the research, and I think also it's important for me to mention that the Mosab president was supposed to be here with us today, but it was impossible to work on the visa and have him here. So I am actually speaking from the point of view of his own ideas and my own idea as we see from what is happening presently in Ogoni land. So I'm specifically looking at fossil fuel, how that has affected the Ogoni people. Now, when we talk about Ogoni, this is my 4th year, I think, participating in this exercise. We are looking at, for those who are coming for the first time, we are looking at one of the minority ethnic groups in Nigeria. I think we have over 250 ethnic groups in Nigeria, and Ogoni is one small, as my own ethnic group. I am from the North Central, and Ogoni is from Southeast Nigeria. And when the Ogoni issue came up, started in 1990, people talk about, or the literature says, we had 500,000 Ogoni people. Now it's over 1 million Ogoni. So we are talking about a very small ethnic group in Nigeria compared to the other ethnic groups, and they speak the Ogoni language. 2 years ago, I was there for 6 months, and I was only 2 weeks this year when I was there just to test my findings. Now, before the extraction of oil in Ogoni land, this is the description, and this is actually from Ken Saro-Wiwa himself in his book, Genocide in Nigeria. Beautiful. And when you meet the Ogoni people, this is the language they speak from the point of view of what Ogoni society was before oil extraction. A very beautiful environment which has become something that the whole world is talking about, from the effect of oil extraction. A beautiful country. I'm from an agricultural background myself, so I can imagine what the Ogoni society was before Shell invaded. I say invaded intentionally because there was no negotiation before Shell entered Ogoni land to begin their work, supported by the Nigerian government. Now, the petrol-military romance, we all, for some of us who know already, since 1957, that was when exactly Shell entered Ogoni land. People would say 58, actually, when the oil started in commercial quantity in Ogoni. But the Nigerian government, as I mentioned before, supported that, and it's been really a big thing. It's really still something that researchers, NGOs, and everybody wants to, I think, go to Ogoni land to see and maybe to talk about. So it's really something that has no end in sight, because Nigeria as a country depends on oil, and the oil that Nigeria depends on is from Ogoni land. So it's not really something that it's going to finish in the near future. We don't know when. So it's really something that we keep talking about. I think as I will come to the close of this presentation, I would mention something in this regard as well. So it's the Ogoni issue is something that really has shaken the entire world. I never was in Ogoni land myself. I only was in Ogoni land 2 years ago when I was there to do my research. Now, I was there for pilot study before the research, because the whole environment, it's now tagged a crisis environment. So it was necessary for me to do a pilot. I was there for 2 months. I planned to be there for 3 months. And it was just 2 months. Why? Because I was staying in a parish environment, and we had to be taken out by the military. One day, we had 3 days without really coming out, and then we had to call the military to take us out of the community of Bomu. And it says actually what really is still happening there in Ogoni land. We can sit maybe outside Ogoni land, even in some parts of Nigeria. People think it's something that is already past, but I think it's really fresh as we can think of it. What the Nigerian government is doing as far as oil exploration is concerned. Even before I came here, I just looked at my email. One thing the government has succeeded in doing with Shell is divide and rule, which is one common thing that a lot of people who have researched in this area talk about. They are still really working on laying pipelines in Ogoni land as we speak, and they have succeeded in manipulating the minds of the Mosab, members of Mosab, especially the officials. So it's really something like, I think I talked about this 2 years ago. You have in Ogoni land 2 sections of Ogonis. Now, people who support whatever, who are tired of the whole suffering and are saying, let's give up. And then people who are saying, we still have to continue. Now, this is the pictures there. Of course, some of them, the flaring specifically from the petrochemical companies or whatever you call them. I witnessed this myself live when I was there 2 years ago. Now, until now, if you go to Ogoni land, the dusts in some parts of Nigeria, we have, like if you leave something, a chair outside or a table, and you come back, you see dust, the natural dust from the sand. But in Ogoni land, it's the soot, the black thing you see, and it's the same in the water. If you collect water from maybe a glass and you leave it for some time, that is just what you see. It's really what the Ogoni people are breathing in, they're drinking. So if they're talking about devastation of their land, I think it's really something genuine, and it's important that we keep talking about it from the point of view of their own effort to see the end of this Mosab, and that's the responsibility that they have given themselves. Now, when all that happened, I think in 1990, that was when Saro-Wiwa started the movement for the survival of Ogoni people, which is really what I have examined when I was out there. The non-violent aspect of my research actually is looking at how can the Ogoni people agitate without violence. And I think the result of my research has really come up with something in this regard. Poverty that is there in Ogoni land has really caused the young people, the disillusionment has caused the young people to begin to be violent. And I have to be specific here, or I have to be clear about the violent nature of the Ogoni people. Now, if you are talking about militant groups in the Niger Delta, you will not have Ogoni on that. You can Google it. I did that a number of times, and you wouldn't find Ogoni or Mosab as one of the violent military groups in the Niger Delta. Their violence is within, and it's all about the divide and rule thing. The government has succeeded. The one thing the government wanted, and even that led to the killing of Saro-Wiwa, was to disorganize the Ogoni people so that they can rule, they can get the oil. The movement of the survival of the Ogoni people is still acting. Some of the groups, like I mentioned before, the Ogonis themselves will tell you we have political Mosab, and then we have the grassroots Mosab who are still moving with the agenda of Mosab. So the violence that is there in Ogoni land aids the young Ogoni people who are tired of poverty and who are really seeking for help. And I see the violent nature of the young people in Ogoni as we are fighting to be free from this oppression. I think that is what I will term the violence that is happening there in Ogoni land. And this is just to say something about what really the Ogoni situation is from the Dere Youth Association in a protest letter to Shell. Actually, this book from Hunt, the book, I think I say it's on the banner there, it's taken from that book. This is a very common, usual language. Our rivers, rivulets, and creeks are all covered with crude oil. We no longer breathe the natural oxygen. Rather, we inhale lethal and ghastly gases. Our water can no longer be drunk unless one wants to test the effect of crude oil on the body. We no longer use vegetables. They are all polluted. Now, very important, the Ogoni people will constantly refer to their land. They are also, it's a community that they were good in agricultural work, and that's their major occupation. And it's like Saro-Wiwa. Those who have read Saro-Wiwa, he so much adored the Ogoni nature, and so brilliantly he will say in his works how the Ogoni vegetation was before the arrival of Shell. And constantly participants that I met, those who participated in my research, would talk about the Ogoni society before, even those who never had contact with their forefathers, like those who lived when the land was good, will say, we heard our parents told us these stories. This is what Ogoni land was, and we are really seeking to be free from all this. Now, so much denial from Shell and the Nigerian government about the damage that the extraction of oil has caused in Ogoni land. Last 2 years, we had the Amnesty guy who came here and gave us a talk. Mark came and gave us an elaborate talk on the UNEP report, the result from the UNEP report. Now, I intentionally have this here to say to us that the denial is not really what we should really consider. What the UNEP report actually has come up with is something that is there in Ogoni land. They did a very sophisticated report, examination of the land, and they came up with this result to say what the Ogoni people are suffering is this. Now, I have explained before, I was there for 6 months, and myself, I thought I would be leaving Ogoni land with cancer. I can't imagine human beings living in Ogoni land breathing the benzene, I think the benzene gas that you have them there taking in every blessed day. They don't have pure water. The water they drink in Ogoni land, it's literally from the contaminated water that the UNEP report described there. And death in Ogoni land is something that we cannot imagine. So there is no denial. This particular report actually has called on the Nigerian government and Shell to clean up the environment. And this is something they have accepted, but then it's still something we are talking about. The UNEP report, nobody has even started talking or thinking about it. So it is on the paper, but there is no engagement to look at what the UNEP report has asked the government and Shell to do. And in the UNEP report, it's clear that this will take 30 years, that it will take 30 years to clean up the Ogoni environment. And if we haven't started, then maybe some of us wouldn't be alive when eventually this will happen. Oil boom, poverty boom. If there is oil in Ogoni land, this is just a clear expression of the Ogoni people. We have everything. We have everything that our land is given to the Nigerian government, but we are dying of poverty. So the language of poverty is something that is really common with the Ogoni people, and the UNPO UNPO report states clearly that 185,000 barrels a day, literally, Ogoni is the wealth of Nigeria. And don't dream of going to see how the occupants of that land are living when we have a central government that doesn't care at all about the life of the people, the lives of the people there. So the Ogoni environment, as we talk about, it's when the Nigerian government is talking about oil boom, the Ogoni society is talking about poverty boom. Now, oil, the power of resistance. It's important also to highlight that what we have there as Mosab, a grassroots social movement that is resisting the occupation of Nigerian government and Shell in Ogoni land. They are not resisting. I worked with Mosab when I was there, and it's really something I think we have come here to talk about. We are talking about fossil fuel. It's not just limited to Ogoni land, but this is something, a universal problem. We have other communities who are still talking about it, but particularly for the Ogoni society, Mosab, no matter how the Nigerian government has succeeded in polarizing the movement, there is still a powerful force. It is a movement that was established really on a very solid Ogoni democratic ground. So it's shaking, but I think Mosab is still strong, and presently they have a president. One of the problems is 3 presidents, but one of the presidents who is really doing well and considered by a majority of the people there is saying to the fact that this movement subsides. Now, it is something I don't think it's going to go. It is something that will eventually fight the battle and then win something for the poor people. Now, this particular book, talking about Saro-Wiwa and talking about how Mosab is really a movement that will never go. It's actually a movement that is an example to movements in Nigeria. I spoke to other social movements in Nigeria, and I think one thing that was clear about this is about Mosab is that Mosab is really a very sophisticated movement. Why? Because Mosab comes from the life of the Ogoni people. Now, one thing you will hear in Ogoni land is we are born Mosab. So every Ogoni is Mosab. The fact that you are born an Ogoni, you are Mosab. Now, but then we have official, those who run the affairs of Mosab is actually a recognized, registered movement. So this book particularly talk about Ken Saro-Wiwa, how he was unjustly killed, but then, as his last words will say, you can kill the message, but you cannot kill. You can kill the one who carries the message, but the message lives on. And that is what Mosab is doing. Both men, women, and children in Ogoni land will say to you, we are Mosab. Now, just to say how and why Mosab will not die, this is actually from my own research. This is, I call it voices, Ogoni Voices. Participants of my research said this. Now, if you read each of these, I don't want to go through them one after the other, but each of them talks about how strong Mosab is. Now, people may think that Mosab is not something that is alive, but when you listen to the Ogoni people themselves, especially from these abstracts, extracts, you will come to see how important that movement is and how we must actually work to seeing that Mosab's voice is not killed by the Nigerian government. It's actually powerful. The Nigerian government against the Ogoni people, it's something very, very serious. And when you listen to them, then you know that a people are crying for freedom. Now, in my research, I have come up clearly, one of the themes I have is freedom, freedom for the Ogoni. And specifically, I looked at what the Ogoni people themselves say that is freedom, development for them. Development for the Ogonis is freedom. Once they are free from this oppression, then they are okay. This is from Nimo Bassi. Nimo Bassi is an environmentalist. He's also very strong in fighting the Ogoni cause. He's actually a very good researcher on the Ogoni people, and he said this. These are very strong words that come from anybody at all that really knows about the Ogoni people, knows their situation, and wants the world to hear of what the Ogoni people are suffering from. Very beautiful poem. It's no longer oil, it is the Ogoni blood that flows. Global solidarity. Now, talking about this, I think it's important. I mentioned this. Ogoni struggle concretely rooted in local organizing. The people are really, I've mentioned this again and again, the people are still moving on. And I think one of the impressions from the Ogoni people is that the world has abandoned them, that we've been abandoned. It's severally, so most of the participants said this to me, that we don't think people think we are existing or we exist here in Ogoni land. So it's important that we be in solidarity. Now, Mosab, as Ken Saro-Wiwa had it, was connected with the entire world. He was somebody who got the courage to engage with the world so that the world hear what was happening in Ogoni land. And I think it is something we must promote. It's not something we should just leave the Ogoni people of Nigeria or people who have been engaged already to do. It's a global cry from the Ogoni people, and I think it's important that we join them in that. It's important because this inequality, it's found around the globe. It was in Ireland. I was in Mayo last, I think it was June or July, I was in Mayo just to see what did take place there. And the language is the same. Wherever you go, where Shell particularly is, it's the same language, the same features. So it's important that we really come together. It must be a collaborative effort. It takes two people to do this. Like in Africa, we say it takes communities to form a village. So it is necessary for us really to try and see how we can help the Ogoni people with this fight for justice. It's a global fight. I think we've had enough. When do you join the Ogoni people? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel. That was a wonderful update, and it's so great to have somebody who's recently come from Nigeria. Now, we do have time for a few questions, so I'll just throw it open if anybody wants to ask anything of Samuel or comment. Yes.
Just be interested to know, how are people surviving in Ogoni land at the moment? How are they? Are there still people trying to engage in agriculture? What is happening?
Yeah, they cannot but do that. Yeah, we have mostly the women will be the ones who will be doing that. They still have little portions of land, you know, bit and pieces where you have them go to farm to try to get a few things for themselves and their children. So it's very, very, it's on a very low scale. They do fishing too. It was farming, fishing, because they have the water there, and the water is polluted too. Normally even the women too were fishing and all that with the men. They go, sometimes they come back empty, and they don't get anything to do that. So it's really, survival is just, means of survival is actually minimal. Really, really, yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Yes.
Has the industry provided employment in the area?
Pardon?
Has the oil industry provided employment in the area?
No, that's one of the major things. It's, if it provides employment, we wouldn't actually be talking about this at all. It's 100% oppression. So no employment for the Ogonis at all. There's one community, of course. There's one community, if you look at the Ogoni society, it's divided into 6 kingdoms. Now, when Saro-Wiwa started Mosab, and they had the Bill of Ogoni Rights, the bill that was submitted to the Nigerian government that made them really afraid that this is really a very good movement that will really fight for what was their right. Eleme, which is one of the communities, didn't sign that Bill of Ogoni Rights, which was written in 1990. Now, the only Ogonis you will find working for Shell are the Eleme, the people from Eleme. And sometimes it's difficult sometimes to get an Eleme person says, I am Ogoni. They have this history between them. They don't think they are Ogonis. They think they are just being put on that, platform, but they don't really feel they are Ogoni, and they are much closer to Port Harcourt than the rest of Ogonis. So they take employment. I remember I interviewed a few of them, especially like those who worked with Shell. Now, I was with one, I arrived, and the first thing he said is, if you want to interview me on the Ogoni issue, then I have to give you also a form to fill. I work with Shell, and you will also have to sign a consent form for me. And I said to him, look, I'm not going to talk about Shell with you. I'm only going to look at poverty in Ogoni land, that's all. So he accepted, and we did the interview. So the Eleme people we will have people from the Eleme kingdom working for Shell, but nobody from none from the rest of the 5 kingdoms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then yourself. So if you could,
do you feel that the last thing you said was the Ogoni feel they are being forgotten?
Yeah.
Do you feel that what you have up there, the global fight, the climate change resistance movement, to keep fossil fuels in the ground, will further marginalise the Ogoni, or actually can assist in representing the views of oppressed people, particularly those oppressed where there is oil being
Yeah, I think.
harvested? Because either could happen.
Yeah.
When you say When are you going to join the fight? Which fight? The fight about climate change or the fight for the people that are being marginalised?
Yeah, it's actually fight for climate change. Now, the climate change issue, it's a global issue, and only if we can fight that and get that right, the Ogoni people will remain in the situation that I talk about. Now, it's a climate issue. They're fighting for their land, specifically now, it's the implementation of the UNEP report. This is the damage that oil extraction has caused on the Ogoni land, water. Now, unless this is really taken out, we can't do anything. So I think the fight for the climate change movement will solve the Ogoni issue. I think that's really what it is. Yeah. And they're working, the Ogoni people themselves are also joining the fight for climate change, actually. That's when you read documents that come from Mosab now, they have a particular program for that. So I think they're also on board with the climate change movement around the world.
Somebody here, yeah.
You mentioned something about the younger people taking to violence, and the way I understood it was it's very much a reaction to the violence inflicted by Shell. And I'm wondering, is this violence towards Shell itself, and if so, what is the response?
Yeah, I spoke about divide and rule. The violence is within themselves. Now, the government succeeded in polarizing the society somehow. They can tell you, yes, we are Ogoni, but then there is division amongst them. So this violence is against themselves. Now, they have communities. It's a very unique African settlement you have there in Ogoni land. So you have this cultism that is the weapon. Now the government has used, government using the young people, giving them arms to fight themselves. So it's young people fighting, one community fighting against another community. So it's not directly against Shell, because they wouldn't see Shell at all. The military in Ogoni land, it's unimaginable. My research, the research ethics committee here asked me not to go to Ogoni land with camera, and I didn't, because if you have a camera there, the military you will be a person of interest. So the military presence in Ogoni land will not allow the young people go near the pipelines like you have in the other Niger Delta communities, where you have vandalization of pipelines and all that. It's not in Ogoni land. In Ogoni land, you will only have explosion, which is not, it has nothing to do with the people. It's just the pressure sometimes from the pipes.
Me?
I'm wondering, do the other communities, the neighbouring communities, the neighbours of Ogoni land, do they support the Ogoni people? And can they put any pressure on the Nigerian government?
Yeah, when Ken started Mosab, I think that issue, it's also something that is worth considering. The divide and rule thing, it's not just limited to the Ogoni people, the 6 kingdoms. They actually got the neighboring communities also to go against the Ogoni people. So initially, in the initial stage, there was this inter-community, inter-ethnic clashes with the Ogoni people too. So it's politics, the hypocrisy there, it's really glaring. Communities are given even money to do exactly what the government wants them to do, to paint a picture, a propaganda picture of, we are not really doing this. It is really the community who are engaged in whatever that is disturbing them.
Maybe we'll take one more question.
Yeah.
Trish.
Thank you, Samuel. I really enjoyed your presentation, and it's good to hear the fight is still going on. My name is Tricia Groves, and I work in Trocra, and we've been involved in the Ogoni campaign since 1995. We tried to save the Ogoni 9. Unfortunately, that didn't succeed. But we're still continuing to fight, and at the moment, we have a campaign on. It's called Making a Killing. It's about business and human rights and the need for a UN international treaty, a binding treaty, to ensure that corporates are held accountable for their actions in countries where they're oppressing local people. So I'd like to know what would your opinion on that be? Would a binding treaty be of use in Ogoni land? Would that help the cause? And any other advice you can give to us, please?
Yeah, I think it will really. I have a copy of that book, and Troker has been really good with the Ogoni issue. I think it's something very, very important that you are doing. One thing about these issues is sometimes it's when we are outside Ogoni land, we talk about these things, we know how to go about them, but then it's difficult to see how that works on the ground. Mostly the Ogoni people, like in my research, the participants will say, I remember when I arrived for the pilot, I just gathered some individuals for focus group interview, and one very clever young man said to me, look, nobody is going to say anything here unless you say who sent you here and what you want. And I said to him, look, Nigerian government didn't send me here. I don't know anything about that. It's my research, and I am just looking for data to do my research. He said, what is our benefit? Because we are tired of answering questions, research questionnaires and all that, and nothing happens on the ground. Now, Nigeria is a sovereign state. Now, if you have that, it's okay, but how to go into Ogoni land, we have to sit and talk about all the methods that we must use to do that, because Ogoni is a center of attraction to the Nigerian government. Whatever you are doing to help the Ogoni people must go with a very good methodology. And I think, Troker, you have the methodology, and an international body, it's really going to work if we really are serious with that. So a good methodology will really help. And I'm ready. I'm in my last year of my research, and development is the area I'm doing my research in, and I'm interested in doing that. And I would love to engage with an Ogoni issue after my research. So, Troker, I'm on board with you.
Great. Thank you. I'm delighted to introduce Marion Higgins. And Marion will be the first of a series of shorter presentations on initiatives to promote awareness and interaction with the archive and awareness of land issues. So Marion is Kildare's county librarian, and she manages a network of 16 locations and a busy local history archive and genealogy service. She also has responsibility for the delivery of arts and cultural services in the county. And as well as being the county librarian, Marion is currently the president of the Library Association of Ireland, and she's working with her colleagues to host the 2020 IFLA, that's the International Federation of Library Associations, World Information and Library Congress here in Dublin next year, and 4,000 librarians will come to Dublin. So that should make an impact. So, Marion.
Thank you, Helen, and I might add 4,000 librarians. That's a bit of a scary thought, and I know I'm helping to organise it, which is even scarier, and so is Carl. So I just want to say, actually, to start, thank you, Samuel. That was an excellent presentation. I have to say I'm quite angry when I listen to you, and a really strong message there that we really do need to listen to, and it's for everybody's benefit. So good morning, ladies, or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to extend my sincere thank you to Helen Fallon for her kind invitation to speak this afternoon as part of the Saro-Wiwa Seminar. As Kildare County Librarian, I'm always acutely conscious of how fortunate we are as a local authority service to operate in the same county as Maynooth University and under the stewardship Cathal McAuley here, who is very humble, I might add, strive to engage with their local community in an open and inclusive way, creating mutually beneficial partnerships for students here and for the citizens that we actually both serve. And it's actually unusual that a public library service and a university service that we are actually so connected, and we do a lot within our communities. Public libraries are neutral community spaces, so they're ideal environments for educating and raising awareness on subjects such as this, where access to information, educational and recreational resources, educational or cultural experiences, self-development and active citizenship are core values. Local government reform in 2011 placed partnership approach at the heart of our community work and outreach. As outward-looking bodies, public libraries were constantly evolving to meet the needs of our diverse communities. It is through a partnership approach that we have the best opportunity to discover and meet the needs of our citizens. And engagement with specialist knowledge provided by Maynooth University enables the Library and Arts Service to deliver programmes in the public realm that afford our patrons the opportunity to be exposed to learning, teaching and creative experiences that challenge, empower, which is so important, and inspire them. Many participants of these programmes have used these opportunities as stepping stones to enrich their lives further. So in recent times, just to give you an idea, apart from, let's say, the current collaboration of other projects where we have collaborated, our Writer in Residence programme with the English department has provided incredible beneficial supports to our library and art service in our communities, and it's now in its 5th year. And it's really provided invaluable opportunities for members of the public to benefit from the creative writing practices of some of our most innovative writers in Ireland today. And you'll hear from Anne-Marie later on. The Maynooth Film for All programme, another initiative of Kildare County Council's Art Service, and the Department of English and Media Studies host monthly film screenings in association with Access Cinema. And again, often they explore topics that are very important topics that need to be discussed, and often topics that are not discussed. The seminar Irish Environments in Transition, funded through Kildare's Creative Ireland programme in association with the Geography Department, is due to take place on Wednesday, the 20th of November, and there will be presentations from artists and scholars alike. Kildare Library and Arts Service, Maynooth University and the County Kildare Leader Partnership are currently running a communiversity programme in Newbridge Library, and this is a free 17-week programme aimed at long-term unemployed and people supported under the SICAP scheme, the Social Inclusion Activation Programme. And currently we have 25 participants attending weekly classes, and we're covering modules such as local history, media, our economy. Climate is involved in that as well, politics, power and people. Again, really important collaboration. So it is in the spirit of partnership in this inclusive environment that Kildare Library and Art Service are delighted to work together with Maynooth University Library to bring the exhibition Ringing the Ogoni Bells to a Thai library, and that happened in January and February of this year. The exhibition, as you know, includes letters, postcards and photographs from the university's Saro-Wiwa archives, and the installation of the travelling exhibition in a Thai library provided an important opportunity for the general public. I might add, we had a huge number of school classes. I think we had around 20 classes actually came in to see that exhibition. And as part of the exhibition, we actually got to talk about the subject, and there was a huge amount of debate. And again, that debate went back into the home environment as well. And then parents came into the library to see the exhibition. So it actually generated a huge amount of a debate and discourse on the subject. So as the issue of environmental change grows in importance and prominence, the exhibition raises issues that are central to the concerns of active citizens across our communities. In October this year, the Library Service partnered once again with Maynooth University Library to host a week-long creative writing initiative in Leixlip Library, exploring the theme of environment. The participants worked with one of our current writers in residence, Anne-Marie, who's actually going to speak very shortly, exploring the connections between voice and landscape. And Helen Fallon, Deputy Librarian here in Maynooth University, led the group through a creative writing session on conflict, creating poems to explore social justice and environmental issues at home and abroad through the Ken Saro-Wiwa story. So whilst all this was happening, it was a very busy time in the library. Children and the children's participants, they were busy actually in the library in art and story making sessions, and they were exploring themes of endangered animals, recycling and climate change. So while the parents were having one creative experience, the children were having a very different but a similar creative experience. So it was a really enriching experience in Leixlip Library, and a wonderful example of how the Ken Saro-Wiwa archive can actually highlight social justice, creating using a creative medium to explore issues. So I'd like to thank you all for listening there, and I look forward to hearing Anne-Marie, and you'll hear a little bit about actually how that experience did transpire in Leixlip Library. Thank you.
So we'll go through all these presentations, they're short, and then at the end we'll have questions. So Anne-Marie Higgins is a poet and writer from the Donegal Gaeltacht. Her books include Bloodroot and Town, and in fact Bloodroot is over on the stand there, so after the talks you can acquire a copy if you wish, and I'm sure she'd be delighted to sign it for you. In 2016 she received a Next Generation Artist Award from President Michael D. Higgins on behalf of the Arts Council. She is a 2019-2020, this year, writer in residence at Maynooth University in partnership with Kildare County Council Arts and Library Service. So Anne-Marie.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks, Samuel, for such an illuminating presentation. It was really so great to be here and experience it. So, Trodona Waidif, Ogoni Environment, good afternoon, all. I've been asked to speak very briefly about my use of landscape in my practice as a poet and a writer and an educator. And I'd like to just begin with a short poem from my own poetry collection, Bloodroot, which brings together my interest in the wild landscape and the subject of care and reconciliation in Ireland. Bog medicine. Drink these star-leafed nettles and keep in your purse a fern. To become invisible, say your harm to the hill. This hill is pagan, this hill is hill. It will answer in bog tongue and occasional fire, burning back the earth along the heather stream, despite bald heels of rock, despite the kissy mink, despite a saintly air, until the stream runs dark with what needs to blacken out of you. So the landscape that I bring to my own work is often the one in which I was raised, which is this one here. It's the northwest Gaeltacht region of Donegal, a bogland boundaried on one side by Tory Island, which was until recently under the rule of a king, And on the other side, there was a manned border, of course, with Northern Ireland. And all around were the shadows of St. Columkill, the Fomorians, Balor of the Evil Eye. The voices one heard seemed to me to be predominantly male, and these male perspectives were expressed physically in the landscape in the form of place names and local folklore and ritual. And out of that particular place, I think, has come for me a series of questions that I'm always engaged in. What is the relationship between landscape and lyrical control? Between control and imagination? Between the place that I physically come from and the state in which I now exist? So as a poet today, I work in schools, healthcare settings, prisons, and with people in the care of the Irish state, including foster care, direct provision, and in dementia care units. I'm also increasingly interested in library spaces, as spaces that are both communal and liminal. At Kildare Town Library, I'm currently delivering a project that works with Christian and pre-Christian stories of Bridget, looking at Bridget as a symbol of struggle and transformation. But most recently, I was invited by Helen to deliver a 2-day creative writing workshop at Leixlip Library. And a key innovation of that workshop was a chance for mothers to bring their children aged approximately 1 to 12 years. And so focusing on the landscape and with children in the space over the 2 sessions, we seemed naturally to drift towards the themes of domestic space and familial dynamics. And the broad range of topics that arose over those sessions included borders, identity, motherhood, and the nature and politics of remembering. In these conversations, I was able to share my own experience of growing up alongside kids in care. And in this poem that I might also read to you, I spoke about the ways that I've reclaimed names from Ireland's ancient landscape to restore power to many of the teenage girls that I at one time lived with. So I'll just read this quite quickly. It's called Sisters. Let it be said, I cut a nick in my own skin, and by a spit became blooded to them all. Maeve, swaddled in clean cloth like a gem, as her mother, aged 16, leaned against the kitchen counter and watched me hold. Breege and Marie, found in a trailer by the river, speaking in a twisted song. Emer, who was always going home. Niamh, who I was wild for and who was wild for me, but who held me under in the pool until both of us were dragged out of the water sobbing. Dara, who pulled her shirt up to reveal a string of roses on her ribs. Here are the gifts of my father, she said. Grace, who could fix any error with a piece of purple gum. Sarah, pure as water, bold as fire. I can still see her tear across the hill on that guy's motorbike, high-headed and ready for battle. Tailed women, denim stealers, alley girls in white musk with 9 lives. These were my sisters. We argued over top bunks, we bled on sheets, we were 4 in a room the winter the house was falling down. We wrote letters to the man on the radio. We scanned the news for names of the dead. We curled letters inside bottles and threw them out to sea. We snapped wishbones, swore on graves, buried our treasure. We swung the gold of our mothers over our palms 3 times and asked the air, will I be loved? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? So in terms of working poetically with landscape and the female voice, now is of course an era of particular richness. In my first collection, which was published in 2017, many of the poems reference the stories of people like Joanne Hayes and Anne Lovett. In the forthcoming collection, which comes after a number of milestone events, including the Repeal the Eighth and the Me Too moment, the new poems have about them a distinctly different atmosphere. And in the library workshops, there has been a change in tone regarding the writing of women's lives and environments, a tone which has yet to seep into the workshops that I'm delivering in state care spaces. And I'm thinking in particular of the workshops I do in Irish prisons. There is within the self-interrupting and routinized system of the prison workshops a continued need to focus on the erased voice, the silenced voice, and the voice which goes unheard in society. I'm often called in the prison workshops to the poems of Alice Walker, Maya Angelou, and Audre Lorde to both release a language that can embrace the sensitivities of landscape and also celebrate a spirit of personal autonomy. So in all of my work, landscape and the Irish language remain fundamentally intertwined. In a recent library workshop, we spoke about the Ogham alphabet, examining the contradictions of ancient Irish culture. In the Irish language, there is, to my knowledge, no verb for to have, which suggests that historically, traditionally, we're not people who by nature are possessors or owners or masters. And yet there is a violence inherent in the act of physically marking the alphabet symbols into sacred parts of the earth, including stone and bark. These thoughts around violence and power, and also justice, are issues that I am addressing in a new poem, which I've titled Throscud. Throscud, T-R-O-S-C-U-D, is an old Gaelic word for the ancient practice in Ireland of fasting for justice. Using this process, a person could turn up to the doorway of he or she who owed you, and by refusing to accept food, shame them publicly into repaying you the debt. This old Irish word brings the human body to the threshold that evokes a liminal space between private and public landscapes, between the interior and the exterior. And for anyone looking to further delve into that liminality, I'd recommend the writings of Marie Quinn, who speaks so eloquently about the companion words in the Irish language of Ceantar and Altar. Ceantar refers to the physical, geographical region of your surroundings, and Altar, an older, now out of word use, refers to the parallel other world. So at the Leixlip Library, there were many moments of insight into who we are and what we sound like in the context of different landscapes. One of the recurring themes was the unknown self, and for this work we read the poetry of both Serbian-American poet Charles Simic and Irish poet Martin Dyer. In Simic's stone, we're invited to go inside, to imagine landscape from the inside out. In Dyer's poem, In There, we are called to think about the sacredness of rural Irish farm life through the birthing of a foal. Both these poems ignited a conversation around personal space and human intervention into nature, which naturally sits within a wider conversation around patriarchal systems and mechanisms of the Irish state. And some of the topics that came up were Irish health and care systems and maternity practice. Perhaps one of the most magical moments of the workshops was when an older child left the playgroup area to wander over to the writing table and listen with eyes wide open to her mother talking about the landscape of her life before motherhood. So at Leixlip Library, I had the feeling that we were deepening our awareness of how voices have been and can be marginalised in different settings. We discussed the direct provision system, causing me to reflect yet again how a stream of shame is ciphered down through system and institution into language, narrative and sound. One of the recurring subjects in relation to landscape is, of course, silence, how it does or does not exist, how it feels to stand at the edge of an ocean, how it is to shout out across a bogland. The writing arising from the Leixlip and Kildare workshops reconnected me to the function of silence not only as an instrument of oppression, but also at times as an engine of the truth. To the landscape of community, poetry brings a high regard for loss, brokenness, and repair. As poets, we count syllables, break lines, separate verses. We strip part and pair to free a new meaning that can move us backwards and forwards in time. One of the great joys of this work is the opportunity to read poems aloud. When the poet recites, attention returns back towards the body, the mouth, the lung, the air. In my poem, The Kerry Foot, written after the Kerry babies, I write of the body as claimed and buried enough. Poetry is an act of unburial, I believe, with the potential to restore us back into the landscape to which we truly belong, placing the body back at the centre of human experience, placing human experience back at the centre of community and state. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and it really was a great privilege to work with Anne-Marie. And that was the first 2 days of the initiative. This third day, Ciara Joyce, our archivist, came to Leixlip Public Library and talked about Ken Saro-Wiwa, and we brought material from here, and really there was tremendous interest in that, and Philomena Obasi was one of the facilitators with that and added a tremendous amount to the discussion. And on the final day, it was Philomena and myself facilitating the group. So I'm next going to introduce Philomena Obasi, and I'll tell you a little bit about her first. Nigerian-born Philomena Obasi has worked in event management consultancy, social care, adult and community education in Ireland, and facilitating different adult and youth groups. She is an education administrator with a degree in English and higher diploma in adult and community education from here, Maynooth University. And she works with children and youth from different countries through leadership and mentoring programs, and is currently a volunteer with the Tala Community Arts as an assistant administrator of a youth group. And she's also an occasional lecturer at Maynooth University. So Philomena, if you'd like to. Thanks, Philomena. And this is where we first met. Sure, thanks.
Yeah. So, good afternoon, everybody. I just want to say thank you to Helen for giving me this opportunity again to come and talk on Ken Saro-Wiwa. During the holidays, I think 3 years ago, you can see the picture there, we came with some youth, some children to the university here just to come and see what they're talking about. They said they have something about Ken Saro-Wiwa. And I was wondering, Ken Saro-Wiwa in Maynooth, in Ireland, I meet him again in a foreign land. Who is talking about him? And we came with these children. You can see most of them are Irish Africans. They've not really been home. They've not really gone. They don't even know anything about their heroes' past. We came here, we went through all the archives, went through all the works, and I was so impressed because we wouldn't have this opportunity in Nigeria. This opportunity, you either disappear, you either have some funny accident somewhere. If you are talking about Ken Saro-Wiwa, that means you're one of them. So that day, these children got some sense of belonging. They had that feeling that we have some African heroes. We even have one called Ken Saro-Wiwa, and they participated in so many things like drawings, quiz, debates, and all that stuff. They went home happy. They went home knowing it's not all about only the Irish heroes. We have African heroes too. That was diversity. That was integration. They can walk and raise their shoulders high with their other contemporaries. So now I want to say a very big thank you also to Samuel. I think he said it all. He's given us all the facts and figures about Ken Saro-Wiwa. And I was opportuned, like Helen said, to have had the facilitation with the Lickslip Library. That period, we wanted to start talking about Ken Saro-Wiwa, and I saw myself going deep down again, talking about him, because my talking about him influenced a lot of things with the participants. Then I realized that we're all singing the same song, but with different tunes. Because what happened in Nigeria some years ago, still happening in Nigeria now, I could relate it with them here, and most of them could understand what I was talking about. They understood about Ken Saro-Wiwa the more. Like, they wanted to know, like some of the questions we've received from here today. What is happening? How could Shell do that to a country, to a community? Nobody's talking about it. And I told them, yes, nobody's talking about it because the Nigerian government has been bribed. I'm from the oil and gas industry. Before I came here, I worked there for like 5 years, but with another one, Total, the French oil and gas in Nigeria. I was with them for 5 years before I came to Ireland 2014. And whatever is happening in Ogoni is happening around all the Niger Delta. They have a lot of states and communities. Ogoni in particular, because somebody decided to stand up and come out in the form of Ken Saro-Wiwa. And we saw what happened to him. He was arrested, and he was brutally murdered or killed, or whatever they call it. The last judgment was death by hanging. While I was in school, I was in university, I was some association president and all that. This was what I wanted to do. I wanted to really, I was against inequality. I wanted justice for all. I grew up from poverty, and I knew what it meant. I could understand some people when they talk. I can remember my parents would say, "You're in school to learn." You see what happened with those students? They were trying to protest, and the military came in with live ammunition, not blank bullets. Students are protesting like in university in Maynooth here. They're just protesting something that is not right. And the government, the supposed government that's supposed to be caring for the people, we send army, we send mobile police, the military police, the ones that fight and kind of de-escalate riots. And they come to school and they start shooting students. And at the end of the day, we have some students dead. They go home and tell their parents, your child is sent to school third year, final year university, or maybe the first year university has been killed. Why? Because we're protesting about something, awareness that was just coming to us. Nobody knew about this. Ken Saro-Wiwa started bringing the awareness out. So we, in the campuses, we started understanding. We're now educated. This can be done in other countries. Most of us have been opportune to travel out of Nigeria to see how they were managing things like this. And we felt, no, this couldn't happen. But they come and they kill us. What do? We keep quiet. We silence ourselves. Our parents beg us to keep quiet. So I try to explain these events and how the circumstances are. And the reason, when you see most of us here, you don't really know. Most people keep wondering. They have summer 365, 24/7 in their country. Why are they coming here to have the cold and all that? So many things we want to do for that country. We're in the minority. We can't do it. So most of us come out and come to environments where we think they can listen to us, they can support us, and we can all work together. So Ken Saro-Wiwa was a very, I wrote something about him and I read about it, and every time I read about it, I cry sometimes, because this man did not even know me, but I followed the curse he was pursuing. It was the curse for everybody. We've seen here, we asked so many questions. What about the corporate responsibility of, excuse me, of the companies? If you are so wealthy, you are going into a land that you did not even negotiate how you come in and what to be for the people. Nigerian government has a corporate responsibility of any establishment. And we felt that Shell's simple, which they can do with just one barrel of crude oil coming out. From crude oil, you get your kerosene, you get your gas, you get your petrol, you get so many things from there. From that, you can build schools. That's what they're just asking for. Build schools, build amenities, give them clean water, clean pipe-borne water. Give them education to be able to control their land. Give them good roads. You can't even walk there. I don't know, Samuel, were you able to drive car, canoe or whatever? What did you use as transportation there? You go with boots to be able to go through the muddy floors. And these were people that predominantly what they had for the, source of living, revenue, was farming and fishing. And you have come in, you spilled oil, and when oil goes on the sea, the fishes, they can't breathe anymore. You've covered the source of air coming into the water. When the oil goes on the plant is growing and it collapses because so many toxic chemicals are reacting with the roots and the formation of that plant. So that was what they're just saying. You want to come do this, give us something and take something, and prepare people in future that would take over the government. So the divide and rule system was the best thing they could do to go in there. Because if you meet the chief, we don't have like TD and all that there. We have things like kingdoms. Like you said, there were some kingdoms. And these kingdoms had their own traditional rulers. So if they go to the traditional ruler and say, yes, this is what I can do for you. You want your children to go to school in Oxford, Cambridge, you want them to go abroad? You need us to get you a beautiful house in London, but we need to do this, and you have to keep those boys quiet, trying to protest. So that was what they were doing. They get the leaders, bribe them, or the quid pro quo, or whatever is going on, with them. They give them so much that they don't even care about their people they are taking care of anymore. So they concentrate and work with the Shell people. So those were all the things that were going on in Nigeria. And coming here to see that Sister Magella gave us that clear opportunity as well. By bringing all this together, we're not having history, we're not talking about it, we're seeing that there's a relationship here, we have things like that happening here, and we have different ways that people are going about it here. That's just what we're appealing. If we can all please come together and see what we can do. It's not only about the Ogoni people. It's about the environment. Like somebody asked, what about their neighbors? What did they do? These things are going on there. But you can't go into Ogoni now because of the presence of the Nigerian military, ready to kill anybody. So thank you, Sister Magella, for making history happen for us. Thank you, Maynooth University, for giving us this archive, giving us this voice, and making the awareness go out there. We really say thank you, and we love you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Anne Cleary. Anne is the librarian at Dundalk Institute of Technology, and in fact it's the first higher education institution in Ireland to take the Saro-Wiwa travelling exhibition, so I was delighted when she expressed interest in it. And Anne is very involved in the library profession nationally. There you are.
So first of all, I want to begin by saying I'm just so grateful to have been here this afternoon, because it's been so inspiring to actually hear the words that people had to say. And yeah, it's quite emotional, actually, surprisingly for me. This is our college, and we're an Institute of Technology. We're located in Dundalk, and for those of you who are not familiar with our geography, Dundalk is about 7 kilometres south of the invisible border. And Dundalk is a place. Dundalk is a place that, until there was an invisible border, was a very difficult and edgy place to be, because we've always been on a border, and it's been the border of the Pale, and then more recently it's been the border with Northern Ireland, and now we don't have a border. So one of the big things in our lives there, as indeed for many people, is to actually keep free movement and that sense of that we can have multiple identities in the place. And you may be hugely impressed to see that we have a wind turbine in our college. And I wish I could say we were actually as connected to the land and to the land around us as that might imply, but sadly we're not. And I guess when I was kind of thinking, really in the last few days about this, and I was thinking about what are the big environmental issues, or what were the big environmental issues in Dundalk. And I think it's important to mention that Dundalk is in a beautiful place. We've got the Irish Sea, we've got the Mourne Mountains and the Coolies, and right across the Irish Sea you used to have, I think you still have actually, a nuclear power plant called Sellafield. And one of the big environmental issues, and I suppose one of the big local issues that doesn't compare with what's going on with the Ogoni people, but it was the big emotional issue for a long, long time, is actually what was happening in terms of the air that was coming across the Irish Sea to Dundalk, and the impact that was having on our health and so on. So I kind of want to say that, because it's not just, as we've all said, about something over there, it's actually about what's going on right beside us. So our library we work with about 5,000 students and about 300 academics. Most of our students are people who are studying for level 8 degrees. We have also a growing research portfolio. And we're currently an Institute of Technology and investigating that process of becoming what's called a technological university, which is the big hot topic in our institute right now. And our library, I suppose we came from being what were called regional technical colleges, and those colleges had remits for the social, economic and cultural development of their regions. And for that reason, in the library, we've always welcomed people from the non-college community. So, if you're a member of the public, you can come into the library. We have a scheme with the local county library so that we've got joint membership and joint borrowing. So we have quite a lot of people like that who come in. Including people who have come in at different times who have been refugees and who've come in because it's the only place you could get Wi-Fi or access to a PC and so on. So when we were thinking about the exhibition, we obviously thought it would be really nice for our students, and every time we have an exhibition we get a lot of good feedback because they really like being attracted by visual displays, and they often also like things that don't take a huge amount of time or effort or like levels of engagement, but actually, I can spend 5 or 10 minutes here, because like many people, I think our students are really time poor. But we're also part of a movement called the College of Sanctuary group, and these are basically, it's a global movement of colleges which I suppose want to create places of welcome for people who are refugees or migrants or seeking asylum. And the library is part of that group in the institution. And I guess the other, kind of thing that's been going on for us is we have a very ethnically diverse, or we think we have a very ethnically diverse student base, but the reality is Ireland has thankfully become very ethnically diverse over the last 20, 30 years. But we're always very conscious that with our students, we have group study rooms, and you can pass a group study room, and there's one room where all the Asian students are, and there's one room where all the black students are. And we keep thinking to ourselves, what are we doing? Why is it like this? What else could we do to engage? So we've been kind of curious about this idea of, well, the stories, and like one of the other speakers mentioned, about the importance of actually showing that there are people who are heroic from different cultures, and that it's not just about famous white men. So that was another reason why we got the exhibition. And then I always think there's always a level of mystery that you can't actually put into a rational statement around why did we get it, because every time we do things like this, they always surprise us in terms of what it takes. But I guess we do have strong relationships with Maynooth. Many of us have worked in Maynooth at different times, and we know the staff in Maynooth Library. So that might have been one of the mysteries that was there. And sorry, I skipped one. No, I didn't. But I guess, there's something also has to be said about why it's important, I think, for libraries to have things like the Saro-Wiwa exhibition in the space. And you only have to hear the testimony that's come from all the other speakers today, that there's something around this that actually speaks in a different way. And I'm really surprised to be quite taken aback by this. But, in my world, sometimes I think I spend all my days just listening to these guys. And, when I listen to them, I hear a narrative that I'm personally appalled by. But it's also a narrative that, talks about power over. It talks about blame. It talks about others. It talks about a lot of the things that are completely contrary to the values that I have as a librarian as well as a human being. And the other thing that seems to be happening, maybe I'm wrong, but I think, that these two well-known people are also kind of having lots of little mirrors around the place, and people who are popping up locally and in our systems that are actually, almost given permission to have a certain kind of narrative. And without a doubt, to me, there is a narrative here that is about politics, power, and our land. So whether that's our land here, or our land in Dundalk, or our land in Nigeria. And it's a relationship that's really, really dysfunctional, and we can see is really, really harmful. So it's really fantastic to have the opportunity through the Saro-Wiwa exhibition to have an alternative narrative in the space. And again, I think, the people that have spoken before me have really touched on most of the things that I wanted to say about that. But it seems to me that it's really been inspirational to have this in our library, and it's been right in the foyer, so it's gotten lots of people passing it and stopping and looking and picking it up. Because it seems to me it speaks to different kinds of things. So it speaks to this idea of being in service, and to actually having service to things that are about more than ourselves and more than about consumerism or having things or so on. And I think it's fantastic to have something as heroic as the stories that are actually articulated here. I know they're tragic, but it's really also just amazing and really inspiring to me, and I hope to our students and to everybody else who's looked at it, to see, sometimes you can do this. And I was really touched by the idea of people, fighting for land and fighting for the waters, because I don't think we actually stop enough to think about, well, what does that mean? Where does the water that's in the plastic bottle that our students leave all around the library, where does it come from, and what's it gone through for it to arrive on the desks and to be put into a dustbin? And what is it like to stand for something really big like that? And as many of us know, this is also the 70th anniversary of the publication of 1984. And it seems to me there's really an invitation for us as individuals and also as librarians to think about that idea of truth to power. And, again, I just feel that a lot of the people who've spoken today have really touched on, what it is like to speak about truth to power. And I think it's really powerful for us in libraries to have spaces where we actually prompt those kind of questions. And I was kind of thinking about this when we had graduation in our college, and a lot of the people who come to our college are their first in their families to come to college. And it's like there's always this idea, you go to college, you get a great job, you buy loads of stuff. And I know there's more to it than that, but there's a little bit of a narrative around that. And I suppose I just felt there was something in the Ken Saro-Wiwa story that, I'm not sure he intended his life to be like what it was. And I think, there's something about us all having attachments to the idea of this is a perfect life and this is how it's supposed to be. And that this exhibition actually really makes us think about that and the kind of dilemmas that we have as individuals, and that are given to us not by choice, but that are often presented to us as individuals. So I think really it's been important for us to have that narrative actually going on in the library. And as I say, we've had a lot of big issues in the institution over the last while, and a lot of things that have been actually about students really finding their voice. So I'd love to say that, we have a really neat story. People came, they saw the Ken Saro-Wiwa exhibition and they did something amazing, but I don't have that kind of evidence about what its impact has been. I think really here today I've been really struck by the fact I'm really sorry that we didn't do something in terms of organising a deeper form of engagement or a conversation about it, and we may come and ask you again for it, Helen, with the intention of doing that. So what we've seen is people actually stopping and reading the pieces and picking up the leaflets and actually just engaging with the exhibition in that way. And we've also had some of our lecturers have organised their class groups to come down as a group, because some of them have projects that have got to do with sustainability or social justice, because we have courses in topics like social care and also engineering and all of this kind of more sustainable I suppose modules have all had an interest in that, and they've come, and I think that's been kind of interesting for us because one of my colleagues, David, who's here, has had a lot of engagement with some of those groups, and through that he's actually also going to talk to the group, which is for us and the library a really nice link as well. And then we've had feedback from people just on email to say they really appreciated the exhibition and they really appreciated being there. And also people who've actually said they really, really loved reading the letters, that the letters were really, really moving for them and they really touched them. So if you're in doubt about whether you should actually get an exhibition like this and put it in, let me really add my voice to anything that would encourage you to do it, because I think it's well worth it. And as I say, if we were doing it again, I think I would really like to figure out how we do a deeper level of engagement with it. And I also want to, I suppose, finish by thanking our own library staff, especially Lorna O'Connor, who worked here as well a long time ago, because Lorna did a lot of the work on the exhibition. But I also really want to honour, I think, the work that goes into an exhibition like this and to an evening and an afternoon like this, because I don't think, I think this is all about love and care, and I think that's to be celebrated, and to thank you and honour you for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And it's interesting, just when you mentioned people stopping to look at an exhibition, I find don't underestimate the power of that. It's really tremendous. I've often noticed people here stopping and saying, gosh, I didn't know anything about this, and you've actually got this collection. So well done. Our next speaker is Ciara Joyce. And Ciara works here in Maynooth University, and she's been very instrumental with our colleague Louise Walsworth-Bell, who's our conservator, in preparing the exhibition for travelling and other aspects. And she previously worked for Donegal County Council, and she's worked on a number of major archives here at Maynooth University, including the Pearse, Hutchinson and Ken Saro-Wiwa collections. So Ciara, I'll grab your slides. Ciara.
Good afternoon, everybody. Right, so I know an awful lot of people here are very familiar with the archive and the story of how the archive came to Maynooth, but just for anyone who isn't, I'm just going to do a little quick summary of the collection. So the Ken Saro-Wiwa archive was donated to Maynooth University Library by Sister Magella McCarran in November 2011. And it is cared for by the Special Collections and Archives Department here in the John Paul II Library, which is just one floor up from where we are now. The archive includes 28 letters to Sister Magella, 27 poems, photographs showing the destruction of Ogoni villages, video cassette recordings, and articles and reviews relating to Saro-Wiwa's work and to the campaign to save his life. The importance of the archive is that it captures in rich detail the last 2 years of Ken Saro-Wiwa's life and documents his transition from activist to political prisoner. The letters and poems in particular record themes such as the ongoing struggle to protect the Ogoni people, growing instability in Nigeria, Saro-Wiwa's condition during his detention, and the importance of his friendship with Sister Magella during the final chapter in his life. So we often describe this collection as the hardest working collection in the library because it is has been utilised as part of a wide range of outreach activities, including seminars like this one, exhibitions, blog posts, articles, poetry workshops, school visits and guided tours. And this is some example of some of the visits and events that we've had, including the visit from school children that Philomena mentioned. And we're very lucky as well to have Owens Wiwa and Saro-Wiwa come visit us here in the library. So the collection has also been used in a module in the Department of Adult and Community Education here, has been displayed for things like International Human Rights Day and Africa Day here in the library, and used in the workshop we did with the children, the Telling the Ogoni Story workshop. And the children that came in that day were aged between 2 and 17 years. So I think that's officially the youngest person we have ever had in special collections. And these are some of the other initiatives which I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with: the travelling exhibition and the SaroWiwa Audio Archive, which was a joint project with Kairos Communications. So a little bit about archives. Preservation of archives is basically what the archive staff here do to ensure the preservation of collections we hold in the repository for future generations. But all the work we do on the collections is pointless unless the collections are actually used. So we are preserving the collections as evidence for future research. So we like to think of archival documents as like a collective memory. So they are our collective memory. So special collections and archives make the archival collections available to a wide audience, but particularly the students and staff of St. Patrick's College, Maynooth and Maynooth University. While students doing independent research frequently visit the reading room, by far the most effective way to engage with students is through classes and visits that form part of the curriculum for which the students get credit for. For this reason, we are always enthusiastic to collaborate with academic departments and to see those collections integrated into the learning experience. Excuse me. So new approaches to skills acquisition and critical thinking using primary sources are increasingly common across campus and beyond. They present to the library exciting ways to engage with users, and to the archivists it offers a wonderful opportunity to share their knowledge and their love of archival collections to an engaged, enthusiastic audience. So the emphasis in education has changed a lot in the last 10 to 15 years from primary schools up. There is real awareness now of skills building rather than learning by rote. So curriculum changes at primary and secondary level have taken place, introducing pupils to primary sources in order to develop investigative and interpretive skills in students. So the benefits of this are clear. We are creating critical thinkers and independent learners and preparing pupils for third level, but also for the workplace. So most recently, the Saro-Wiwa collection was used in a workshop that was a collaboration between the Edward M. Kennedy Institute and the Maynooth University Library. So just a little bit about the institute itself. It was established in 2011 here at Maynooth University. And to quote them themselves, the overall aim of the institute through teaching, theory and practice, research and community engagement is to improve society's capacity to deal constructively with conflict. So in early 2019, the Institute approached the library about the possibility of using the Saro-Wiwa archive to deliver a part one module entitled Peace, Religion and Diplomacy. The module is offered on the MA in Mediation and Conflict Intervention and the MA in International Peace Building, Security and Development Practice here at Maynooth University. Through a series of lectures and workshops, the module addresses freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief, and questions regarding religion and society from the perspective of diplomacy. 2 workshops are offered on the theme of conscience and the individual, one looking at the case of Ken Saro-Wiwa and one at the case of Franz Jägerstätter, who was an Austrian World War II conscientious objector who was executed in Berlin in 1943 on a charge of undermining military morale. Students were then asked to compare the stories of the two men. And that's just the two of them there. Deputy Librarian Helen Fallon and I delivered the SaroWiwa workshop to participating students in the Special Collections and Archives reading room in March of this year. So the workshop began with an introduction to SaroWiwa and the Ogoni cause delivered by Helen. Students were given the context of SaroWiwa's campaign, arrest and execution, and the background of how the letters he wrote to Sister Magella found their way to Maynooth. Students then had the opportunity to look at the original letters, poems and photographs displayed in the reading room. I spoke about each of the items exhibited, reading out relevant extracts from the letters. The items were carefully chosen based on their content and the required learning outlined in the course descriptor. Students were asked to consider the complexity of the personal, political, economic and legal issues facing SaroWiwa, or anyone who takes a counter-cultural stance. Each letter displayed showed evidence of these issues. So I thought we couldn't go without looking at just one letter, so this is one letter from the collection that we used today in the workshop. It was actually very difficult to select letters for the workshop, not because there wasn't great material. The fact was there was too much. I could nearly have taken every single letter out and quoted from every single one. I'm just going to read out a little quote from this one, which we read out and discussed in the workshop. It's actually the underlined section there at the bottom of the letter. There are a lot more difficulties ahead. However, I believe that I've done what God wanted me to, and have spared nothing to achieve His will. He will have to decide what happens to me. Incarceration is nothing. I must expect more of it, and even death. But I want to live to help recreate Ogoni society. So for a quick dissemination of the contents of the documents and to aid the discussion, students received a handout highlighting relevant extracts similar to this one from the letters. The students undertaking this module are extremely enthusiastic, well-informed and engaged with the topic. The subsequent discussion showed their knowledge of the SaroWiwa story, but also demonstrated that they had thoroughly considered the implications of the stance he made and his personal sacrifice. Four of the participating students were from Nigeria and were able to offer their unique perspective on SaroWiwa's writings and the contents of the letters, which is interesting for both participants and library staff. I have to say personally, I learned something new that day, and I think every time we take the collection out and we have a group in, I do learn more about SaroWiwa and the whole story, the Ogoni story. So these are the learning outcomes as described in the course. So what the Institute had laid out, what they wanted the students to take away from the workshop, and I think we covered it well. The workshop afforded the opportunity to critically examine a complex and multi-dimensional topic. The original letters and the issues they embody were used as a catalyst then for discussion, demonstrating their usefulness in the development of investigative and interpretive skills, but also the document's ability to stimulate informed discussion. There was a high level of student engagement. I mean, the discussion could have gone on and on. It went way beyond the allotted time for the workshop. Now, to some extent, this could be accounted for the maturity and commitment of the students on this MA, but I also feel it was you could account for by the enhanced learning experience afforded by accessing original documents. And there is also, of course, an emotional aspect to being in the presence of such personal items belonging to a story that ended so tragically. For some of the participants, it was their first visit to Special Collections and Archives, and it demonstrated to them the work we do and the importance of preserving and consulting primary sources. We get an awful lot of history students in and occasionally language students into Special Collections, but this was an opportunity to reach out to a different group of students. So some of them were good enough to pose for a photograph for me. So this is the students the day they came in, and they're pictured here with their lecturer, former diplomat and senior fellow at the Institute, Philip McDonough, who's there in the background. Overall, the workshop was very enjoyable and worthwhile, as I said, for both students and staff, and the library has received very positive feedback from the participants. 3 out of the 7 students decided to use SaroWiwa for their module assignment, indicating the high level of interest in the workshop. So the workshop will run again this year in December for the new intake of students on the MA. So just finally to say, just to remind everyone that the contents of the archive are being published and the book is available on open access. The letters themselves have been digitised, and you want to see the original letters, you can find them on the Digital Repository of Ireland. If you just Google DRI, you'll find it. And obviously the audio archive is available on the library website. But just also to say, the collection is all the actual collection is available to students and external readers who wish to consult it in the reading room. So you just need to contact Special Collections to make an appointment, and the email address is there, and we would love to see you come in. Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Jessica Traynor, and Jessica is a poet, and she has been the judge of our Ken Saro-Wiwa poetry competition, so she will be announcing the winner of that. But before that, I think she's going to read. Is that the order we're going to do it in? Which do you? Yeah, perfect. So her debut poetry collection, which is called Liffey Swim, was shortlisted for the 2015 Strong Shine Award. In 2019, she was commissioned by BBC Radio to write a response to Swift's A Modest Proposal, and also by Music for Galway to write an opera, Paper Boat, with composer Elaine Agnew for Galway 2020. And Paper Boat will premiere in June 2020. Her second collection, The Quick, was published to critical acclaim in 2018. And Jessica, there are copies of the books here for anyone who wants to buy them, and Jessica will be happy to sign after the seminar. In 2019, she edited Correspondences, an anthology to call for an end to direct provision with actor Stephen Ray, bringing together artists and writers in direct provision with Irish writers. That will launch at the Dublin Book Festival, which is coming up, is it what night? Saturday. And where is it? In Smockalley, so hopefully it still places. She's the 220 Carlow Writer-in-Residence, the recipient of the 220 Banagher Public Art Commission, and an inaugural Creative Fellow of UCD. And indeed, on YouTube, you can hear Jessica on the UCD recordings, a wonderful resource overall too, and wonderful to listen to Jessica on that. So Jessica.
Hello everybody, it's a real honour to be here and to be involved in the wonderful work done here at the library around the Ken Saro-Wiwa archive. It's been such an amazing journey of discovery for me, learning all about him and about the amazing work Sister Magella has done. And I think at the moment, at a time where there's a lot of controversy and a lot of, dare I say, xenophobia going on in Irish culture, it's wonderful to be able to look at the times when Irish society has responded really positively and proactively to the struggles of people in other lands where their empathy has allowed them to really connect. So I've been delighted to judge the Ken Saro-Wiwa Schools Writing Competition this year, and I think at the end of my little talk we're going to invite the two of them are here, so I'm going to invite them both up to read their prize-winning pieces. But before I do that, Helen has asked me to talk a little bit about this anthology, Correspondences, which is an anthology that myself and Stephen Ray have edited this year. And I want to talk a little bit about the anthology itself and about the process behind it. Stephen has been a friend of mine for a long time. I have a background in theatre, and we would have worked together in the Abbey Theatre, but I'm also a poet myself. And like many people in Irish society, I have been for a long time a concerned bystander to the system of direct provision, a person who has had grave concerns about this system that keeps people in a kind of a limbo without any decision on their applications for, at the moment, I think 5 years is the average time that many people are kept waiting. But I, like many people in Irish society, had never had the opportunity really to come face to face with somebody who had experienced this system. because people in direct provision are kept very, very distant from the rest of the people in society, in a kind of an institutional practice that unfortunately the Irish people and the Irish society have been very good at over the past 100 years since the birth of the state. So in 2017, Stephen Ray asked me to be involved in a group of lectures, a series of lectures by Field Day, who are a theatre company, but also a kind of a company that creates series of lectures and creative engagement around contemporary issues. And they were running a series of lectures called The Right to Have Rights. And they wanted to focus in very much on the system of direct provision, to scrutinise it, to bring writers in Irish society, but also writers and activists in direct provision together with also people like Judge Brian McMahon, who wrote the McMahon Report, to talk about this system. And Stephen invited me to read a poem at one of the lectures in Galway and one in Dublin, and he was aware of a poem that I had written in response to a website called Asylum Archive, which is an amazing resource. It's recently been taken on board by the Digital Repository of Ireland by a man called Vukasin Nedeljkovic, and he came through the direct provision system and is a wonderful photographer, and he has been really kind of creating a living archive of direct provision centres all over Ireland. And I wrote a poem inspired by his photographs of Mosney, which I remembered in my childhood as a holiday camp, and which now is of course one of the biggest direct provision centres in Ireland. So I'm going to read it for you now. The Camp. People once came here on holidays. Can you imagine? The Earth's navel on view outside the window, grass pocked with mud, and nothing for miles but bad weather. When asylum seekers came, someone wired the walls with 100 flat black eyes. How bored they must have been, these cameras, watching the slow waltz of imprisonment, the petty squabbles, the shudder of a waking body on a cold morning, the horizon lifting like a cat's third eyelid above the frozen ground. The glare of a bare light bulb casting tableau behind families hunched over scheduled dinners as tablets rattle in medication vials and children squall until a door is slammed. Who was the monster at the centre of this maze? So after this series of lectures, myself and Stephen thought to ourselves, how do we, as artists, I suppose, do something to keep this conversation going? And, you know, as artists, we have to believe in the power of art to create empathy, and I think that is what it's for. You know, that's what writing is for. I think writing is one of the only ways that somebody can immediately step into the shoes of another person, and I think film and painting and music and dance can all create the same experience. So we started talking about creating an anthology that brought together some of the voices, some of the wonderful writing we'd come across by people who are in direct provision, both about the experiences that led them to leave their own countries and about the experience that they found in Ireland. It was a difficult process to start off. Firstly, both myself and Stephen were very concerned about wanting to do something positive, but walking into a situation that we did not know much about. So I spoke to a number of different NGOs, a number of my friends who are activists, and a number of people who had come through direct provision, like Malatu Ukena-Okori, who wrote a wonderful book called This Hostile Life that I would recommend anybody to read. It's a wonderful account of life in direct provision, about what is helpful, what might be helpful, who are the right charities to engage with. One of the major issues in direct provision is that there are NGOs doing fantastic work, but much of that work is to improve the system, whereas many people in direct provision feel very strongly that the system simply needs to be ended. And when we say end direct provision, that's not open borders, allow everybody in. It's simply to speed up the process of asylum applications, so that people maybe they need to stay in a reception centre for a couple of months while this happens, but it's not years, and it's not this completely impenetrable process where people do not understand why they're being brought back for interview after interview after interview and hearing nothing about their claim, where they're dreading the arrival of these mysterious envelopes, where deportations happen during the summer when the people's solicitors may be on holiday. There are all these incredible issues and flaws with the system. Yes, there have been improvements, but it's a kind of sticking plaster. So my friends who are activists in the area recommended that we deal mostly with MASI, Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland, and this is an organisation run by and for people who are in or have come through direct provision. And what they do is they get advice for people in direct provision. They help them with kind of regular shortages that can happen in the system, including issues like parents unable to buy their children's school books or get them uniforms. We've heard cases in direct provision centres where women have been left without formula for their babies. But MASI also campaign very starkly for an end to direct provision. So we chose them as the beneficiary of this anthology. It's €15 and all of the proceeds go directly to MASI. We were very, very keen that should be the case. Another part of the anthology was about finding a way that it wasn't just myself and Stephen as two well-meaning people kind of shoving a bunch of people into this anthology and saying thank you for your time and see you later. So what I did was, and what myself and Stephen did was, we asked people to submit contributions for the anthology. We asked for writing, we also asked for visual art and photography, and all of these are featured in the anthology. But what we asked people to do is to express an interest in maybe mentorship of some kind. So if there was a writer in direct provision who was keen to work with maybe an Irish writer to develop their writing, we set up that relationship so that hopefully even after the anthology, there will be a few small, tenuous, but hopefully lasting connections made, meaningful connections made between people who feel very isolated and often feel very unwelcome in this system and Irish writers. So that, I think, has been one of the most enjoyable aspects of the anthology. We've had wonderful pairings between people. Anne-Marie was one of the people who acted as a mentor to a wonderful poet called Evgeny Shtorn, an LGBTQ activist from Russia who had to leave and has recently been granted, I think, leave to remain and is now finally out of direct provision after a number of years. But I know he and Anne-Marie have stayed in touch, and there are friendships that have come out of this book. Even though they may be few, I hope they will make a difference. And I also hope that this book might be a gateway for people like me who were concerned bystanders to be able to hear a few first-hand accounts and hear also about the incredibly complex reasons why people leave their own countries. One of the challenges, I think, for people to understand direct provision is the fact that it's not just as easy as famine and war. It's also political intimidation, it's social injustice, it's domestic abuse, it's all sorts of different reasons aside from and as well as. And I think, resources like the Ken Saro-Wiwa archive allow people to understand the complexities at play in a country like Nigeria, where far too often recently people have been labelled simply economic migrants, as if that is in somehow a crime, by people in a country where half of the population was decimated by famine, or half of the population was decimated by famine and migration in the 19th century. How short our memories can be. So before I move on to the competition, I'm just going to read a short extract from our youngest contributor to the anthology, a young girl from Afghanistan called Marwa Zamir, who was 15 years old when she submitted this piece to us. In Kabul, I was busy playing. It is hard to forget them. It was an accident in Kabul. I was busy playing with my sister and my cousin outside my uncle's house when suddenly a horrible sound shocked everything. It was like when you pause a video for a few minutes, then play it back. The windows were shuttered. I heard people screaming, asking for help. I heard a man yelling so loud, crying Kumak, which means help in Farsi. My mum came and said, "Run, go inside." The kids were crying. They were so scared they were shaking. Even I was. My grandmother made lemon juice for the kids to stop them crying. 30 minutes later, Mum said, "Let's go home before anything worse happens." So while walking back, the streets were full of policemen, the Afghan Force Army and American soldiers with big tanks. I saw dead bodies lying on the street. Mum said, "Just close your eyes, hold my hand and keep walking."
2 minutes later, Mum said we could open our eyes again. We saw a few people cleaning something disgusting like blood, corpses buried in their clothes and burnt iron parts. Women were trying to get closer to the scene of the massacre, but the police were not letting them. They kept begging, "Please let me go, my husband is there." They were crying out so loud that the police let them approach. I was not crying. I don't know why. I was just staring at the crowd. There was not a single taxi to be found. 20 minutes later, a taxi appeared. We took it and the taxi driver said, "I will charge you a double fare." My mum replied, "Just go." People dead in the streets and the taxi driver was thinking about his business. We arrived home and my mum started looking for my dad and our own family on the phone. Me and my siblings were sitting waiting on my brother's bed, holding each other's hands and looking at our mother's face. The TV was on for 4 or 5 hours. Mum was watching the news and said, "It's late now, let's sleep." No one slept that night in their room. Every one of us slept with Mum. I was holding my mum's hand. My sister was holding my mum's feet. Everyone was attached to her. I don't know about the others, but I could not sleep. Whenever I closed my eyes, I could see the blood and the body parts still dressed in their clothes. I kept my eyes open every minute. I was calling my mum. That night was too long and frightening. I was counting every single second in my mind. So thank you for listening to that. That's one example of the many, many stories that you'll find in this anthology, and I don't feel ashamed in trying to plug them because they'll go to a good cause. There are some for sale over there, and they'll be available in Books Upstairs and the Gutter Bookshop in Dublin, and then hopefully in some other bookshops around the country. So to move on to the recipients of our writing prizes, we had some wonderful, wonderful entries this year, and the theme that we asked people to respond to was the theme of eco-heroes, which was something that myself and Helen were talking about last year, which is the notion that, you know, we talk about heroes, and heroes can often be a kind of a militaristic idea, people who, you know, work through violence, but really the heroes I think that we need at the moment are the people who will understand that the next great struggle is for us to kind of save our environment. So both of the pieces of writing that stood out here really, really were passionate about that cause, and I'm just going to read a little bit about both of them. So the winning poem is Human's Greatest Sin by Herjan Vergara, and it's a really ambitious piece, and it manages to encompass a really large and complex narrative. It does what great poetry should do, which is to tell a big long story in very few words. So in the poem, a child addresses the legacy that they'll inherit by interrogating their parents about what humans have done to the planet. So it reflects the anxiety and anger felt by many young people about what the future might hold for them, for the environment, and for their own families in the future. There's imagery throughout of extinct animals, which is moving. You know, we think of the fact that I have a 2-year-old. Will she know what a rhino is? You know, it's happening. This extinction is happening all around us, and there's a wonderful driving rhyme scheme that creates a real sense of movement and momentum throughout, and really carries the passion of the speaker through. And then there was also a prose piece that we felt really, really deserved some attention for its real skill, which is The Bite of Biafra by Elizabeth Akinwande. And it's an intensely lyrical prose piece, really rich with imagery and symbolism. It's about the experience of a child cast out on the waves, surrounded by an oil slick. The complex history of the region is called forth through really vivid imagery and the juxtaposition of gleaming gold and dark, greasy oil. The writer demonstrates a natural talent for world and atmosphere building and a keenly observant eye. I really felt like I was out there on the sea with the speaker. So I think both of these young writers have demonstrated their ability to communicate their passion for ecological and humanitarian issues. And they've created pieces that call for a better way of living, and I think that they call us all to account as well. So I'd like to call Herjan and Elizabeth up now to read their pieces in that order, and a round of applause for them both.
Yeah, whenever you're ready now.
Okay.
Human's greatest sin. Mother, father, my little child said, as she rushed into my bedroom and leaped onto my bed. With a look of excitement and wonder, what are these creatures, she pondered. Images of creatures which existed long ago rushed into extinction from the human damage humans did so. We invaded their homes and took their resources. If they fought back our way, we would force in. We famished our earth, our greatest sin. But mother, father, surely we humans have done great. Humans are perfect, said in Christian faith. A lie it is, it's far from the truth. Does the destruction we've done make us absolute? Not a single patch of nature seen in our cities. Our plan of action is only feeling pity. Our buildings and factories, standing in nature's way, nowhere to expand, left to decline and fade away. The air we respirate is corrupted and twisted. There was once a time it wasn't as misted. Now with every breath, feels like you're choking. Without a cigarette, you're basically smoking. Stay if we would, disappear if we would, life would thrive. Stay if we would, life would die. With a look of excitement no longer on her face, she bitterly said, "What is wrong with the human race?"
This is a piece called...
If you wanted to, yeah, the microphone just... Elizabeth.
Yes. This is a piece called Biafra. Phrasing. Wrapped up in myself. The sea rocks violently, almost like the tempest raging on in my head, shaking my security. This boat is ripped apart by the waves, and my life by the war. Nigeria torn in two, like the weak silk it was made out of. The needle and thread in the hands of the government. Instead of sewing the fabric of our country back together, they pricked us, bonded us, and left us no choice but to leave. The bite of Biafra. The oil on which the boat rocks is the violence in which my mind absorbs, chipping off pieces of me as it repeats. Biafra, Nigeria, torn silk, black gold, dust. I don't know how many days have passed, maybe 12, maybe 33. Too lost in my own world to notice. Too lost in my old world to notice. Trying to savor the last morsels of the boy that I had become. So exposed to the terror of the man I would be and where this oil slick would take me. The heaving and labored breaths of a woman stole my attention. Her sickly green tainted the once mahogany of her skin, and she heaved over the side of the boat. Sweat permeated from her tattered clothes. I knew her name was Nieka. She told me warmly when we first got onto the boat. Her matronly smile was a source of comfort for the first couple of days. And she spoke Igbo, just like I. And she told me, "Iye, nile, guardian ma noam. Everything will be fine, my son." I reached my hand to her shoulder and mustered all the comfort I had out of my heart into hers. I whispered, "Anyi, Gadi, Nma. We will be okay." And she closed into me and wept. She wept for the both of us, and everything we had lost, everything we had grown to love, and everything in between.
Our last speaker today is Sister Magella McCarran, who really started the ball rolling, if you like. So it's very fitting that we should have her as the final speaker. So do you want me to move your slides on? Would you like to sit down, Magella, up here? Oh, okay, right. And I'll...
In one of his letters, Ken Saro-Wiwa wrote to me, and don't ever forget the Ogoni people. Well, I'm very proud of the fact that we haven't forgotten the Ogoni people. And I've had so many people to help me with that since 2011. It's completely unbelievable, really. So to Maynooth University, to all the librarian, assistant librarian, wonderful things have happened over the last 11 years. And I was deprived utterly of my quiet moment to remember it all. And I think it's not going to stop as far as I can see. So thank you and lots of people who travel quite a long distance to come here today. Now, I'm not going to speak maybe 10 minutes, and I'm not going to speak all the time. I will just put on a slide, you look at it, you think about it for a second, and then maybe I'll go on to the second one. So that, who was talking about the quiet spaces?
Well, you.
No, not Cal, the lady behind there. Weren't you talking about quiet spaces? You were, yes. So I said, let me take her good advice and give some quiet spaces for everybody to enjoy. So I don't know where you press that.
Okay, no, it's fine. Say the next one.
No, to the first one just.
Okay.
So this is number 1, and this is the wonderful book that Maynooth University Library produced. And I suppose my proudest moment in all of that is the fact that it's on open access, because that means that every Ogoni in Nigeria, every Ogoni in the US, in Ireland, all can access it. And if you knew just how precious that is, when I was in Ogoni, we would be taking one sheet of newspaper and flying down the road to photocopy 20 copies and float them out, because we couldn't afford newspapers at all at that time. I also want silence would be treason. So today's theme of the slides is a bit about that. Just say it to yourselves, silence would be treason. It's very powerful, a line from one of Ken's poems. And this, we've just finished poetry, so this is one of Ken's poems. And it was his son writing to himself. He projected himself, and he heard his son saying to him, keep out of prison. And then he goes on and says, I can't. Not as long as the world is destroyed for you and for me. And I'm also emphasizing a little bit 2019. So this is 2019. And Andy Rowell is an environmental journalist, usually with The Guardian. But he wrote an article last week, and it touched me a lot. He said, I am now the same age as Ken would be if he was alive. And that was 78, and we were all 48 when this started. So I just thought of a man walking around in elder age. And the silence would be treason. The themes now are what we suffer when we don't keep silence. And that was the first one, the courtroom, where the court case was managed in order to kill the Ogoni 9. a great marriage of ideas happened between the Ogoni people and the Eris people with their common enemy, Shell. And at one time, when they understood the story much more fully, I think, than I understood it, because they were a community looking out on the ocean, just like the Ogoni community, they raised these 9 crosses at the gate. And those 9 crosses are opposite the terminal gate. And this piece, a little piece on the opposite side of the road, we are told belongs to the company. And on Good Friday, we used to have a march to record our sufferings over an era. Same enemy, same place. So that happened, I think, between 2004, I stand to be corrected, Terence, to 2019, the crosses disappeared this Good Friday. And they were put up again during the day. Another set was made by a young group of activists, put the names of the Ogoni 9, put them up again, and before Good Friday, darkness had fallen. The crosses were gone again. Now, in the meantime, Shell had sold out all that had made such a war over in Eris, and another Canadian company had bought into the company. So anyway, we felt we would recognise that the crosses were gone. So last week, Terence went into the general manager. Maybe Terence, just tell what you did, if you don't mind.
I went into the office of the Mullet and I asked them about the crosses, that we'd like to have the crosses back. I said, I don't wish to put them back up, I said, just like the crosses. So the guy was talking to, I forget his name, Johnny Ree, I'm not sure what his name is, but he seemed very considerate, and he said, I'm certain they wouldn't have been got rid of. So he promised to check with security and get back to me. So last Friday they phoned me, I think it was last Friday, yeah, and the crosses are gone. So obviously they dumped the crosses.
So we had a hope, Helen, that this week we'd have brought the crosses to the archives here as a memorial of that union between the Ogoni people, it's all their names on the crosses, and the Eris people when that happened. September 2019. This was an absolute and utter shock to me, because I knew Patrick Nagbaton. He is an Ogoni guy, one of the top human rights defenders in Nigeria, not just for Ogoni, but for the country. And as I write it there, he's an Ogoni activist, journalist, poet, and frontline defender, because he got an award from the Dublin office of Frontline Defender just a week or two ago. Well, no, 2 or 3 years ago. So he was very, very favoured, and his life was very dangerous. And he wrote an article in a Nigerian newspaper when he returned home the last time from Dublin. And he said the best part of it all was a conversation with his mother. Because when he was born, he was a very, very critical child at birth. And those Irish ladies who came to look after us in the hospital, they saved your life. This was something he had never heard before, and I never heard it either. So he wrote a long article about his mother's, are you going to Ireland? Yes. Would you find those Irish nurses and tell them thank you for looking after me. And I think 3 times through a big long article, he wrote that, and at the end of it he said, "And Ireland, remember, I'm coming back." So he died about 4 weeks ago. Somebody mentioned it here in a poem or an article, one of those peculiar accidents, it is believed. And he was knocked down by a car that veered off the edge of the street as he was waiting to go to work. So the general feeling is that that's another way of shutting up a prophet. I think this is a precious slide as well. The Ogonis were wonderful to the people of Erris when they were going through, in fact, they were both going through their troubles together. But up to 4 times, Ogoni people came to support the people. And they didn't come maybe through Dublin, they came up through Shannon maybe for one night and went back again. And this is Saro-Wiwa, the brother of Saro-Wiwa, after those deaths were over, there to welcome home the Rossport 5 out of prison. So there were 2 communities that understood their mutual stories very strongly. And I remember the first time I went into SaroWiwa's office when this sign had gone up on the door. I didn't know what to do. Would I be courageous enough ever to go in through that door again? Because this big sign had appeared on the door overnight. This is when he was alive and healthy and going ahead with his activism. But the spirit of Ogoni says no, puts you on the ground sometimes. And this is a 17-year-old, 18-year-old boy over in Erris being lifted from the beach by the Gardaí. 3 huge strong fellas for a young lad of 16. And I think I took a poem from the Ken's poems, and I thought it was lovely. Paint the cruel marks of your sin on the walls of history. So I'm doing it. I'm marking your sins on the walls of history by sharing that with you. The line there was from Saro-Wiwa's poetry as well. I'm not worried, from the letter. And then this is one of his poems. There's a fire in me, leaps at oppression, from the Ken Saro-Wiwa latest writings, is the last book that we did here. And this is Maura Harrington from Shell to Sea, when she was in full flight of her activism. And they took that story so well that as she went into full ground protest, she carried the cross with Saro-Wiwa's name on it and lay down there as an act of protest. Just before I do that one, with Shell has left Ireland now, and somebody asked about why don't we ever hear again? We haven't heard again because they're gone. And you know, activists depend on particular points. Either we go to a petrol station, or we go to their head office, or we do this or do that. But suddenly it dawned on me about a year ago, we have no point of protest again. It's all gone. Shell is all gone from the country. Would I say that that's good or bad? I don't. It's just a fact. If it's good, great, but I'm not sure that it's great. But it has, you see, it has denied us of remembering Ogoni, of remembering Erris even, and struggling back. This is, just that. That's Eddie Mitchell from Leitrim, and the gas fracking. And Fidelma's down here at the back. We were looking for a big photograph of her. This is Fidelma O'Kane from the gold mines up in Save Our Sperns. Fidelma's and you're the only body alive here. Would you stand up and let everybody see you? At least to see one live one anyway. Fidelma won a judicial review. Maybe Fidelma, just a minute to tell what it was about. Out loud now, come on.
That's terrible. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm from a group called Save Our Sperns in County Tyrone, and we're campaigning against the toxic pollution of gold mining. So there's a Canadian company called Dalradian who has applied for planning permission for a gold mine in our area, and they've got lots of prospecting licences, over 126,000 hectares. They submitted their planning application in November 2017, but because we have no government in the north, they haven't got planning permission as yet. But in advance of submitting their planning application, they got a discharge consent that allowed them to put 9 heavy metals and suspended solids into the local river, the Onkillu River, which is a special area of conservation because of the presence of freshwater pearl mussels, salmon spawning and otters. So back in December 2017, I initiated a judicial review so to question the decision, because I was shocked, because we had put in objections to the granting of the discharge consent. I did it initially as a personal litigant, and it has dragged on for 2 years almost, and it was only sorted last week. Now, the last year I've had a legal team, because it had got to the stage where they were, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency had a barrister and solicitor, the gold mining company had 2 barristers and 2 solicitors, and there was me. So whenever I would say something and they would say I was being defamatory, I would never say they were being defamatory, because I didn't know what the rules of the court were. So it was very overwhelming in court. But anyhow, at the very end up, they conceded last week, Tuesday the 5th, and the water discharge consent was quashed, and costs were granted for my legal, people. But it's not over yet.
That's all right, yeah.
It's not over yet. They haven't. This is only one small battle in a bigger war.
Yeah, thank you. I think it shows the wars from the very first slide, where SaroWiwa was waiting to be hanged, to the success of the last one, where we even have to force the courts to do an honest job. So thank you very much. That in 2019 is where we're at. Okay? Thank you.
Will you come here, Michelle?
Oh, I have another one. And another one. Oh, I'm so excited about Fidelma's win as well. Well, this is a storytelling now. When the Ogoni people fled to those tents in the next country, there was a little catechist whom I had never met who kept on, we want more rosary beads, we want more catechisms, he had a full-time church going on in the Republic of Benin out in the camp. There were nearly all Catholics out there. And I did my best. And the last time I heard from him, about, maybe 18 years ago, he was on his way to Nebraska with green cards from that. The Americans had allowed them to come in. And then last week, because I do my reading up near this, I saw this name, Kitawita, and I said, that's very like that catechist name that I knew 22 years ago. So I click, and he is writing something about Ogoni, also coming up for the 10th, and he has a bit of news on it. There's an interview with the Crux Catholic paper in the USA. So I kept following it, and I kept following it. And it turns out that not only was he a successful catechist, but he started studying for the Catholic priesthood 10 years ago. And he was ordained this time 2 years ago. And I asked him, have you ever been back to Ogoni? Because he said no. I said, how many years is that? 22 years. And he said, don't worry, my mother and my brother were able to come for my ordination. Now, he's as bad as many of the other Ogonis. He writes poetry by the yard. So I took 2 lines just from the one he wrote the other day. And Ogoni for him is the golden pearl, must be protected from extinction by the exploring wolves and tigers from afar. Very nice one. And then the last one is, there's this dilemma between the academic and the artist and the activist. So I find myself in an awful awkward position up here, because I really am in the middle of that bridge, you know. And I have to be very careful, because I enjoy what the academics do and I enjoy what the artists do. But that's not what I'm supposed to be at. I'm supposed to be at that rough edge. That was my commitment. So I just left that, and I'll stop there and can be left on the screen. That's where Ireland is at with mining licenses at the moment. So thank you very much. If you need work, there's plenty there, okay?